Now, less than 2 weeks after a US, UK, Australian submarine deal isolated France, Paris has now agreed a multi-billion euro deal with Athens through which Greece will buy 3 French warships. Speaking this morning, President Macron hailed the deal as a major boost in European defences. He's long argued that Europe needs to increase its military autonomy and shouldn't be so reliant on the United States. Have a listen to Macron speaking this morning.
Les Européens doivent sortir de la naïveté.
Europeans must stop being naive when we're feeling increased pressure from foreign powers to react and to show that we also have the power and capacity to defend ourselves doesn't mean escalating tensions. It's simply a way to gain respect.
C'est simplement nous faire respecter.
Well, covering this story for us today is our Brussels correspondent, Dave Keating, and we can speak to him now. Dave, European military autonomy is an idea that's been floating around for a while. It's sometimes called the European army. Walk us back a bit. Give us the context for this kind of language.
Well, this type of deal, which is a cooperation, a military cooperation between EU countries, is very much in line with this idea of strategic autonomy, which is the big buzzword here in Brussels at the moment. It's been being pushed by Commission President Ursula von der Leyen and Council President Charles Michel. It's this idea that essentially European countries rely on the United States too much, particularly militarily, and they rely on the U.S. not just directly in terms of troops, given that both countries like Germany and Italy are unable to defend themselves without the U.S. troops which are based in those countries, but also indirectly that European countries' militaries purchase military equipment and technology from the United States, and they're dependent on the United States for the technology. The idea is that Europe should be able to defend itself without the help of the United States, and in perhaps a very far-fetched scenario, to even be able to defend itself from the United States if it came to that. This is across all kinds of areas. It's not just in direct purchasing of military technology, but also in military technology that we even use every day. For instance, the European Space Agency is developing an alternative to GPS, which is called Galileo. You might ask, why do we need another GPS when we already have one? It's because the GPS is run by the U.S. military, so we're all a bit dependent on the U.S. military when we use our phones. So it stretches across a lot of areas, and Macron's point, which he will stress when France takes over the rotating presidents of the EU on January 1st, is that the EU needs to be more self-reliant when it comes to military spending and actual military operations.
And how realistic is all of that, Dave, that the EU may become far more militarily independent from the United States?
Well, there's already been efforts in this area stretching back 20 years. It started with the Maastricht Treaty when a security and defense pillar of the European Union was developed. Then in the 1990s, NATO kind of gave a slight nod to this. And there have been missions from EU defense where European soldiers fought in Africa, in the Balkans. But there were always very, very tiny little efforts. And this really hasn't gotten going. The big problem is that many countries, including Eastern Europe, the Nordics, and before the UK, were worried that any type of EU defense would subtract from NATO, that it would make NATO irrelevant. And there's a lot of countries that trust the United States and trust NATO more than they trust their European neighbors. And that's been the big block here. There has to be more trust between European countries before you can get these initiatives off the ground. What Macron wants to do starting January 1st is convince Europeans that the United States may not be as reliable as they have thought, that they are naive to think that this arrangement can continue, and that whether they like their European neighbors or not, it's really the only option going forward if they want real military defense and they want real sovereignty over their defense here in Europe.
All right, really interesting stuff. Thanks very much indeed. Dave Keating for us there, live in Brussels. Well, let's